In this video, I'll be going over some of the calculations related to retirement planning, as well as some Excel tools you might be interested in. So in this first example, we're going to be calculating net worth. Ted Riley owns a 2012 Lexus worth $40,000. He owns a home worth $275,000. He has a checking account with $800 in it and a savings account with $1,900 in it. He has a mutual fund of $110,000. His personal assets are worth $90,000. He still owes $25,000 on his car, $150,000 on his home, and he has a balance on his credit card of $1,600. What is Ted's net worth? So here we have our assets and our liabilities separated. Recall that assets is anything that you own that has value, and then liabilities is what you owe to someone else. So to get our net worth, we'll subtract liabilities from our assets. So looking at our totals here on both sides, we'll take $517,700 for our assets and subtract the liabilities of $176,600. That gives us $341,100. Calculate approximately how much money an older household with an annual income of $45,000 spends on housing each year. You'll want to use Exhibit 14-3 for this one. So here's our formula. Money spent on housing equals our annual income times the average housing percent. So we're going to go over to Exhibit 14-3 to figure out the average housing percent we want to apply to our annual income. So here's Exhibit 14-3, and you'll see that there's two columns, one for age 65 to 74 and one column for 75 and older. Since this was a 65 plus household, we're going to use this column here. We're going to go down until we find housing and then go across and look for the percentage. So it's 32.4. So that's what the number we're going to use for our problem. So taking our annual income of $45,000, we'll multiply it by the 32.4%. And I like to convert my percentages into decimals, so I will rewrite that as 0.324. And then when I multiply those together, I get $14,580 spent on housing on an annual basis. In this problem, we're going to look at annual health care expenses, calculate approximately how much money an older household with an annual income of $38,000 spends on health care each year. We'll be using Exhibit 14-3. So here's our formula. The money spent on health care is going to be our annual income times the average healthcare percent. So going over to Exhibit 14-3, we're looking in this column again between the ages of 65 to 74 and going down until we see healthcare. We'll look across for the percent and it says 12.2. So this is the value that we're going to use for our formula. So taking our 38,000, multiplying it by the 12.2% from our table, and I'm going to rewrite that as a decimal. That gives me 0.122. When I multiply those two together, the money spent on healthcare each year will be $4,636. Next, let's calculate retirement. Ruby is 25 and has a good job at a biotech company. She currently has $10,000 in an IRA. She believes her IRA will grow at an annual rate of 8%, and she plans to leave it untouched until she retires at age 65. Ruby estimates that she will need $875,000 in her total retirement nest egg by the time she is 65 in order to have a retirement income of $20,000 a year. She expects that Social Security will pay her $15,000 a year. So in Part A, we want to know how much will Ruby's IRA be worth when she needs to start withdrawing money from it when she retires. So here's the formula for the future value of our IRA. It's going to be the present value of our IRA. That's the $10,000 she currently has in it, times the future value factor that comes from Exhibit 1A, which is from back in Chapter 1. So we need to make sure we know our percentage, that's the 8%, and we need to know our period, or the number of years that she's investing. So to do that, we'll take her 65 years of when she wants to retire, minus her current age of 25. That gives her 40 years to invest for retirement. So we're going to go over to the Exhibit 1A, and I'm going to look for the 8%, so I'm in this column right here. And as you can see on the screen, I can only see up to 11 years. So I have to scroll down until I get to the 40-year mark. So here's my 8%, and I'm going to slowly scroll down until I get to 40 years. So I can see my 40 years row here. So the factor we're going to use is 21.725. So we're plugging in our numbers. Our present value is the $10,000 in our IRA times the factor we got from the Exhibit 1A at 21.725. That gives us a future value of her IRA at $217,250. In Part B, how much money will she have to accumulate in her company's 401k plan over the next 40 years in order to reach her retirement income goal? The formula we're going to use to figure out how much she needs in her 401k is going to be the total retirement savings goal minus her future value of the IRA. So we have the $875,000 that she estimated needing for her retirement minus the future value of the IRA that we found in Part A. That gives us a required future value of her 401k at $657,750. In this next example, we're going to be looking at a nest egg. Say you have $100,000 in your retirement fund that is earning 5.5% per year compounded quarterly. We're going to be using Exhibit 14-7 here. So the first question asks how many dollars in withdrawals per month would reduce this nest egg to $0 in 20 years. So you have to pay attention to the details in the question in order to know what you're looking at in our table. So first, in our Exhibit 14-7, we're going to be looking at the $100,000 row because that's how much we have in our retirement fund. And we're going to be looking at the column for 20 years because that's what we want to know in our question, bringing our nest egg down to 0 in 20 years. So here's the starting amount of our nest egg. And I'll look at the $100,000 that we have. And then I have my 20 years column right here. And so when I look across, it's going to be $680. So you can withdraw each month $680 and expect that within 20 years you'll have 0 left in your nest egg. And the next question, it asks how many dollars per month can you withdraw for as long as you live and still leave the nest egg intact? Now you might ask, why do you want a nest egg intact? Perhaps you want that to give to your family after you pass, or you have other purposes like you want to donate it somewhere. So we're going to be looking again at the $100,000 row because that's how much you have in your retirement fund. And you're going to be looking at the last column in the table. So again, I'm going to go down until I get to my 100,000 in my nest egg. You can see the very last column on the right of our table says you can withdraw this much each month and leave your nest egg intact. So when we look across and down the column, we see $460 a month. So you can withdraw $460 a month and still leave your nest egg intact for as long as you live. Next, let's calculate gifts to children. Barry and his wife Mary have accumulated over $3.5 million during their 50 years of marriage. They have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. How much money can they gift to their children without any gift tax liability? So here's our formula. It's the maximum tax-free gifts to children. The number in our formula starts with a 15,000. Then we'll multiply it by the number of children times the number of spouses giving gifts. So that's the 15,000 allowed by law times the 3 children times the 2 spouses, Barry and Mary. When we multiply across, we get $90,000 as the maximum tax-free gifts that you can give to the children. Anything after that is taxable. What about if we want to do gifts to family? So Barry and his wife Mary have accumulated over $3.5 million during their 50 years of marriage. They have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. What is the total amount of estate removed from Barry and Mary's estate if they gift the maximum allowable amount to their children and grandchildren without incurring any gift taxes? It's just another way of saying how much can they give without getting taxed. So here's our formula for the maximum tax-free gifts to family. Notice that it's a family and not just children, so it's broader now. So we'll take the $15,000 allowed by law times the number of family members times the number of spouses giving gifts. So here we've got our 15,000 times, and for the number of family members, recall that we have 3 kids and 5 grandkids. That's a total of 8 family members. And then we still have our 2 spouses of Barry and Mary. So plugging that all into our calculator, we get $240,000 that we can give without getting taxed. Now I also have some Excel tools you might be interested in. The first tab offers a comparison chart that can let you analyze your different retirement plans, whether you've got a 401k or a 403b or an IRA or a Roth. And so the chart just lists different pieces of information that you'll want to keep track of so that you can see how they compare side by side, such as deposits, employer contributions, the rate of return, any service charges or fees, how much is covered, any payroll deductions, tax benefits, any penalties for early withdrawal, and anything else that you want to note. So this is a nice checklist to just be aware of the characteristics on the different retirement plans that you might have and you should be aware of. If you click on the second tab, this one's a really cool one. It's actually very similar to some of the examples that we did in the homework, but it's in an Excel format. And so this is going to help you figure out how much money you need to save each year in order to cover your retirement living costs. So for instance, let's say I've calculated all my living expenses from health and food and housing, and I estimate that I need $60,000 a year. So I'm looking at my age, I'm 35, and I want to retire at 65, so that means I've got 30 years to save up. And so the future value of living expenses, assuming I will retire in 30 years. So I'll plug in the 30 year right there. And we assume that living expenses will rise at an annual rate of 3%. Then this number right, anything in the dark gray, a number will appear based on what you plug into the light gray. So this calculates the future value. This should sound familiar. It's from the Exhibit 1A of Chapter 1 that I need, and it tells me how much annual retirement living expenses will be as it's adjusted for inflation. So you can see it's $145,635.75. It's quite a bit. So as I scroll down, also here, I need to estimate the anticipated annual income that I expect to receive at retirement. So I expect to receive $18,000 from Social Security income on an annual basis. I expect company pension or personal retirement account income at $20K a year, and I probably have some other investments, and I anticipate $9,500 a year. And so that'll get totaled up for my total retirement income. And then these two numbers will subtract. That's what it says here, subtract B from A. And this tells me that I have a shortfall of $98,135.75. So I need to continue to save for the next 30 years to account for this. So how do we figure that out? So when we look at this, it also notes some additional information to be aware of. So this is the expected annual rate of return on invested funds before retirement. So let's say it's 8%, and I expect to retire in, and I'm going to update that to, let's say, 30 years. And the expected annual rate of our return on invested funds after retirement, let's say it's 5%, right? So you'll have to do some estimation on the different annual rate of return that you anticipate to see, and that will adjust my number even further. So it tells me that how much the additional amount needed at retirement to fund the shortfall is almost $2 million. So as I scroll down, and that sounds scary to me, right? So our annual deposit required to achieve the needed investment fund. Again, I'm looking at 30 years, and I'm hoping I can get an 8% interest rate on my deposits. So it gives me a factor that I'm going to be using right here. And so the annual deposit, so how much money I need to continue to save each year, is going to be $17,297.49. So this is how much I have to put away each year into an investment fund that is going to return 8% on my investment in order to address the shortfall between my various retirement incomes and my goal for retirement. Now, if this $17,000 doesn't seem feasible for me, I can adjust a couple of things. For instance, I can go back up to the top and reevaluate my estimated annual living expenses. So maybe $60,000 is just too much. Perhaps I need to budget better on food and housing. Alternatively, I can look at my estimated annual income for retirement and think about perhaps getting more aggressive investment opportunities that can increase my retirement income. I can also consider retiring at 70 instead of 65. So that'll give me an additional 5 years to save money over time. So there's a lot of little things that I can, with this worksheet, then go back and decide where can I adjust in order to set myself up for something that I can manage. In the last tab, it's another chart that'll help you plan for your estate. It's got some questions that'll remind you of where to keep things. Do you have copies of everything you need? Do you have a will? Have you made funeral and burial arrangements? Is there a trust available? Have you prepared a letter of last instruction. Where is it located? And do you have everything documented that if you passed, someone can take over the estate and manage it accordingly? So just a couple of tools here you might be interested in. If you have any questions, just let me know.